I'm Jonathan Wilson. It's 4:04. We're up to 92 degrees here in Washington. In WAMU regional news, more officials are calling for D.C. Council member Jack Evans to step down from the WMATA board as additional details of his ethics violations are revealed. WAMU's transportation reporter Jordan Pascal has the details.
A newly released 20-page memo to the Metro Board says investigators found a pattern of Evans helping his friends and clients. It says he put their interests ahead of Metro's. Evan was getting paid as a consultant by Colonial Parking while helping the company seek Metro contracts. Evans did not disclose that relationship. D.C. Councilmember Mary Chase says the council needs to seriously discuss removing him from the board.
This may undercut confidence that people have in WMATA.
District Councilmember David Grasso, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, and Virginia Congressman Don Beyer and Jerry Connolly have called for his resignation. Evans previously said he will not step down. The D.C. Council appointed Evans and is the only body that can remove him from the Metro Board. For WAMU, I'm Jordan Pascal.
In a case that hinged on the religion clause of the Constitution, the Supreme Court ruled today in favor of keeping the Bladensburg Peace Cross in Prince George's County. WAMU's Dominique Maria Benessi has more.
In a 7-2 decision, the High Court ruled that the memorial can stay on public land and be maintained by taxpayer dollars. Governor Larry Hogan said in a statement that the ruling, quote, ensures that this memorial, a dignified tribute to those who came before us and made the ultimate sacrifice, will stand tall and proud for the ages, end quote. The dissenting opinion came from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said that making the cross a war memorial doesn't make it secular and gives precedent to other religious symbols to be constitutional. The cross was built in 1925 to honor World War I veterans in Prince George's County. For WAMU, I'm Dominique Maria Benessi.
Look for showers and thunderstorms tonight, an overnight low of 68 degrees. That's WAMU Regional News.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. There was meeting after meeting today in Washington about what happens next in the Persian Gulf now that Iran has downed a U.S. Navy drone over the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran claims the drone was in Iranian airspace, while the U.S. says it was in international waters. President Trump has called Iran's actions a big mistake. But in a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Trump also downplayed the attack.
I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it. But we'll be able to report back, and you'll understand exactly what happened. But it was a very foolish move. That I can tell you.
Joining us now is NPR national political correspondent Mara Liasson. Hi, Mara.
Hi, Ari.
Any indication of what the U.S. response here will be?
No, we don't know because we don't. So far, the White House has sent very mixed messages all along on Iran. We've had the president tweet at one point that if Iran wants to fight, quote, that will be the official end of Iran. But as you just heard, lately he's been much more conciliatory. He's told Time magazine that he considered the recent attacks on tankers in the Gulf as minor. He said he would go to war over nukes, but not over these tactical attacks. And last night, he told Sean Hannity this.
As you look at the geopolitical workup there, Iran, Russia, China, tell me your concerns.
Don't worry about a thing. Everything's under control. Don't worry about a thing.
So nothing to worry about. Trump sometimes presents as a kind of hawkish unilateralist, but everything he has said recently indicates he does not want a war with Iran. Today, he reminded people that he had campaigned against wars in the Middle East. And even though he said the U.S. would not stand for this kind of attack on the drone, he really almost gave Iran a pass. You heard him just say somebody did something foolish. He made a point of saying there was no person in the drone. So losing an American life seems to be a red line for him, and it hasn't been crossed.
This seems so different from what his official and unofficial advisors have been saying, many of whom are much more hawkish.
Much more hawkish. In the past, both Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton have sounded much more aggressive, talking about regime change in Iran. Two of the president's big supporters in the Senate, Senators Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, have called for a military response. But today we did not hear from Bolton or Pompeo. All we know is that Bolton is going to Israel to talk to the Israelis and the Russians this weekend. We have heard from critics of the president, even people who think Iran is a bad actor, saying that Trump doesn't have a coherent policy and that he's even responsible for some of this latest escalation because he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal without a clearly thought out strategy for what comes next. He put these crippling economic sanctions, the maximum pressure campaign, onto Iran with the assumption that it would cause Iran to change its behavior or sue for peace, but that hasn't happened.
He made these remarks sitting next to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who pointedly said he's looking to the international community to address the growing crisis. Talk about the challenges Trump faces keeping allies together on Iran policy.
Well, it's going to be hard. The allies didn't want him to pull out of the nuclear deal. The White House has lost some credibility with allies because Trump has told so many untruths. They also are suspicious. They think Pompeo and Bolton are looking for an excuse to go to war. So Trump's foreign policy has played well for his base, but it's left him isolated with less credibility with his allies.
That's NPR's Mara Eliason. Thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
And a little piece of news here to insert. Iran's spokesperson at the United Nations has tweeted and said, and I'll quote, "While Iran does not seek war, it reserves its inherent right to take all appropriate and necessary measures against any hostile act and is determined to vigorously defend its land, sea, and air." That is the Iranian spokesperson to the UN just tweeting there. So let's bring in another voice to help us sort all this out. Retired Lieutenant General Dave Deptula. He is a retired U.S. Air Force officer. He commanded the air campaign over Afghanistan in 2001, along with a lot of other military operations in his time, and he joins us now. General, welcome.
Hey, good afternoon, Mary Louise.
Hi, so glad to have you with us. And let me start here. Just to recap this war of words, Iran says the U.S. is lying about where the drone was shot down. The U.S. says Iran is lying. How are we likely to know? How will this be resolved beyond a take one person's word over the other situation? How do they figure that out?
Well, first, there's obviously the release of the actual location data for where the BAMS, or Broad Area Maritime Surveillance aircraft, was flying. Hopefully it will be released shortly by Central Command. But part of it, too, Mary Louise, is the fact that there's absolutely no reason for this aircraft to have to fly over Iran to gather the data that the U.S. military was interested in gathering.
You're saying there's circumstantial evidence that just why would it have been there, which
well,
tends
right.
to support
and no
the U.S.
U.S. commander, is speaking from experience, would put the aircraft in that kind of a situation. And for your audience, that reason is that unlike aircraft, surveillance aircraft in the past, the kind of sensor systems that are on board this drone are such that they can see dozens and dozens and dozens of miles away from the aircraft. So, it's flying up above 50,000 feet over the Straits of Hormuz. It can monitor the entire straits plus see inside Iran without having to fly over it.
Hey, just a little bit more detail, if you would, on this specific drone. We're told it was an RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance drone. Do you have any sense of how many of those are out flying over the region, how widely used they are? What intel are they collecting?
Well, my understanding is the aircraft was an RQ-4 BAMS-D, which is one of the early Block 10 Global Hawks that the Air Force had and then shifted it over to the Navy as a test bed for a later variant of the BAMS-D to be procured later on. So it is it in essence is a Global Hawk, high altitude, long endurance unmanned aircraft.
And a surveillance drone, so it's collecting video, photos, not weaponized, no missiles or anything.
No, there are absolutely no weapons on this aircraft. There are 3 types of sensors that it can carry: electro-optical, infrared, and radar. And the Navy has a particular sensor known as the multifunction active sensor, which is the first radar system that can provide 360-degree persistent coverage of both open seas and littoral regions.
So the bottom line here is Iran has now shot a U.S. plane out of the sky. I'll put to you the same question we just put to Mara Eliason. Any sense of what the U.S. response will be?
Well, as you might imagine, and there are a variety of courses of action that the Department of Defense, specifically the commanders in Central Command, have provided to the President and the National Security staff, and they will take a look at those and put those in context vis-a-vis the diplomatic and political actions that are also occurring as this is going on, and determine one or another. And they run the entire gamut from a non-lethal response to more lethal actions, such as
forceful military response.
Yeah, taking out surface-to-air missile systems that are in the vicinity. Some of a lesser option would be to set up a no-sailing zone around the tankers.
General Deptula, thank you. We have to leave it there. That's Dave Deptula. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Take care, Mary Louise.
He's Dean of the Mitchell Institute of Air Power Studies.
YouTube is something of a modern-day babysitter, and it is under fire for collecting data on young children without asking their parents first. The company may face a big fine by the Federal Trade Commission, as NPR's Aarti Shahani reports.
Here's a poorly kept secret. Little kids watch YouTube a lot.
Hey, everyone. Today, we're unrolling Poopsie toilet rolls.
So many little kids are on, it's prompted the quirkiest cultural phenomenon, unboxing toys. Taking toys out of boxes and bags, one after the other.
What do we have here? Unicorn food. Such a cute curly bag.
Here is the issue. Under a federal privacy law passed in the 1990s, websites directed at kids under 13 have to get parents' consent before collecting or sharing the kids' personal information. YouTube doesn't do that. The company owned by Google has an official line. You have to be 13 or older to have an account, so that kids' privacy law doesn't apply. The Washington Post has reported the FTC is in the late stages of an investigation into YouTube for possible child privacy violations and may impose a fine on the company. This comes at a time when regulators, the Justice Department, and Congress are investigating the growing power of big tech. Ashkan Soltani, former FTC chief technologist, says the regulator may be responding to political pressure.
I know it's not supposed to, right, in the same way it's not supposed to affect the Supreme Court, but I do know that there's interest in signaling they're reining in big tech.
Google and YouTube have been accused of leaving children vulnerable to pedophiles. Privacy and watchdog groups have for years charged that the companies are illegally gathering data on children and that they're targeting videos at children that would never have passed muster in the TV days. These videos are commercials paid for by toy makers, like many of the unboxing videos. Angela Campbell, a law professor at Georgetown University, who's filed numerous complaints to the FTC about Google and its partners, points out they are not the only ones.
This problem has gone on for a long time, and it's just sort of been, ignored. And it's, I think, it's now just gotten too big to ignore.
Google, an NPR sponsor, declined to comment on potential FTC action. Campbell says that after years of inaction, she's seeing a kind of bipartisan consensus forming, with Democrats concerned about privacy violations and Republicans about inappropriate content landing in front of kids' eyeballs. Though some content is just silly.
And here we actually have unicorn poop!
Aarti Shahani, NPR News.
And you're listening to All Things Considered.
We're live, we're local, and we're Washington's NPR news station, WAMU 88.5. Coming up later this hour on All Things Considered, last year the Trump administration began its zero-tolerance immigration policy.
If you are smuggling a child, we will prosecute you, and that child may be separated from you.
Coming up, how that moment and the outcry that it sparked changed the debate about immigration in America. That's in about 20 minutes here on WAMU. And later this evening on Marketplace, the country was on tenterhooks yesterday awaiting the Fed's decision on interest rates. Yet some Fed watchers have suggested a cut may not have been such a big deal. So why all the attention on the central bank's decision? That's on Marketplace tonight at 6.
I'm Andy McDaniel, head of content and news. Day after day, you hear WAMU's local journalists reporting on the issues that matter to you. They do it truthfully, and they do it with integrity. Public radio journalism isn't about sensationalism or slant. It's about community service. We do it for you. Support the journalism you rely on. Make a gift at WAMU.org or call 800-248-8850. And thank you.
Support for WAMU comes from America's biopharmaceutical companies. Every day, researchers across the country, including here in the D.C. area, go boldly in search for tomorrow's breakthrough cures. For all of us, more at goboldly.com. Xfinity X1 from Comcast, enabling you to search for shows and movies by speaking into the X1 voice remote. Plus, access to Netflix with Xfinity X1. Xfinity.com. Restrictions apply. Johns Hopkins Medicine in the greater Washington area, celebrating cancer survivors during National Cancer Survivors Month. Learn more at visithopkinscancerdc.org.
88 degrees right now here in D.C., 85 in Crofton, 87 in Fairfax.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at Subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. And from Fidelity Investments, taking a personalized approach to helping clients grow, preserve, and manage their wealth. Learn more at fidelity.com/wealth. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Former Vice President Joe Biden is on the defensive with his fellow Democrats. At a fundraiser this week, Biden talked about working with people he disagreed with, and he mentioned 2 segregationist senators as examples. Now, some of Biden's fellow presidential candidates and others in the party are criticizing him for racial insensitivity. Jamal Simmons is a Democratic strategist and host of Hill TV. He's not affiliated with any of the campaigns. Welcome to All Things Considered.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
So at this New York fundraiser on Tuesday night, Biden talked about working with 2 now deceased segregationist senators. One of them was James Eastland of Mississippi, and Biden said, "He never called me boy, he always called me son." Biden sees working with these men as a good thing. He says he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. What do you think?
I don't think Joe Biden is racist in any sense that we normally think of. I think that he comes from an era, though, that where I guess race just wasn't a disqualifying factor, perhaps, for some relationships.
Well, 2 of Biden's rivals for the nomination have been vocal about this. Kamala Harris and Cory Booker are both senators. They're both African-American. Here's what they had to say, starting with Senator Harris.
To coddle the reputations of segregationists, of people who, if they had their way, I would literally not be standing here as a member of the United States Senate, is, I think, it's misinformed and it's wrong.
I know that somebody running for president of the United States, somebody running to be the leader of our party, should know that using the word boy in the way he did can cause hurt and pain, and we need a presidential nominee and the leader of our party to be sensitive to that.
Jamal Simmons, whether or not Biden is racist, do you think he owes someone an apology, as Cory Booker says he does?
I'll tell you this. Cory Booker certainly doesn't owe Joe Biden an apology. That is probably Biden asking for that was maybe even as offensive as the earlier statement.
So just the play-by-play here. Booker said Biden ought to apologize. Biden said, no, it's Booker who ought to apologize. That's where this is coming from.
Yeah, look, the Biden campaign can decide whether or not it should apologize. It certainly should commit to not using those examples going forward. There's a bigger issue for Vice President Biden. He gets a lot of credit from African Americans. He gets a lot of credit from Democrats up and down the line for his personal story, his commitment to Barack Obama. The question is, does Vice President Biden have the agility to make his way through the modern Democratic Party's crosscurrents? And it just means that on issues of race, on issues of LGBTQ rights, on issues of gender equity, and he hasn't yet shown he's really able to surf those cross currents.
We have seen some senior Democrats in the party, African Americans, defending Biden. I mean, like James Clyburn, the House Majority Whip of South Carolina, he is coming to Biden's defense. Explain why that might be.
Well, listen, like I said, a lot of people really like Vice President Biden, admire Vice President Biden. I am one of them. Traditional Democrats will be for whoever the Democratic nominee is. Those atypical Democrats who don't always vote, they show up when they're inspired. So I just think Vice President Biden is going to have to speak to that part of the party while he's also making his case to the establishment.
Biden is 76 years old, and there is a long history of people kind of making excuses for generational differences, especially when it comes to race. How much of this is simply a generational divide?
Oh, I think a lot of it is generational. I think of, sometimes when you're out and about and you maybe go visit a friend. I'm African American. I have been at events with white friends where they had family members who, just would randomly start talking about Denzel Washington or Michael Jordan as people they admired. And you wonder, it's apropos of nothing. You wonder, why is that?
Right. Or they're using outdated language or any number of things, right?
Sure. And they're trying to find a way to relate, but it's kind of ham-handed. And, because they mean well, you kind of give them permission and keep moving. I think that that's probably true of somebody who comes from Vice President Biden's generation. The question is that the best Democratic nominee that the Democratic Party can field against Donald Trump?
That's Democratic strategist Jamal Simmons. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to talk to you.
President Trump is pushing Democrats in Congress to back a new trade deal for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. The USMCA, as it's called, would replace the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And Trump met with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today, talking it up.
It's really great for everybody. And unions, it's great for unions. I mean, we have tremendous union support, too.
But the U.S. labor movement is also stepping up pressure to prevent passage of the deal unless major changes are made. NPR's Don Gagne reports from Michigan.
With Democrats in the majority in the U.S. House, labor finds itself with increased clout when it comes to the proposed U.S.-Canada-Mexico trade agreement. To that end, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka has been on the road this week in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan, holding town halls with union members. Last night, in a union hall just south of Detroit, he looked back to the 2016 campaign and the way candidate Trump spoke to working-class voters.
Now, President Trump campaigned on a new NAFTA. And quite frankly, that's one of the big reasons why he got elected.
But the AFL-CIO leader says President Trump has been anything but good for workers, and this new version of NAFTA is a prime example. He says workers need to know what's really in the proposed deal rather than accept Trump's boast that he's kept his promise to dump the old NAFTA.
The labor section in the agreement is actually better, but here's the problem. You can't enforce it. There's no way to enforce the agreement, and therefore it becomes useless.
His take is that it's a problem throughout the deal. He says he has assurances from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that she won't hold a vote until significant fixes are made. Last night's Detroit area town hall was attended by more than 200 people from a wide variety of unions. In 2016, Trump did not win the union vote, but he did significantly better with those voters than previous GOP nominees. Still, there was no visible Trump support in the room, and the questions to Trumka included some wondering why the AFL-CIO is even willing to work with the White House to try to fix this deal. Pete Landon is a retired Teamster.
I came today hoping that I would hear something new in terms of what our strategy is going forward.
Landon says he's lost faith in Democrats being a reliable ally on these issues. He has an even stronger recommendation to union leaders.
Let's dump NAFTA. Let's have that as the slogan, like TPP, not let's adjust it, let's refine it, let's renew it.
But plenty of others in the crowd were encouraged to see the union launching this public campaign to counter what corporate interests are already doing to get the USMCA passed. And even though Trumka himself seemed intent on mostly avoiding politics on this tour, especially the race for the Democratic presidential nomination, politics did come up. There was this awkward moment when one union